Ladies and gentlemen, this is DVP World. You're watching another edition of Break the Fake, where we debunk fake news and combat false narratives. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and let's get rolling. Now, during Wednesday's massive attack on Ukraine, Russian drones didn't just buzz Ukrainian skies, they also wandered into Poland. Repeatedly, Warsaw called it an unprecedented act of aggression. The Polish military fired back and confirmed several drones were shot down. Now, in response, Poland isn't waiting around. Security measures are up, and a state of emergency is now in place for territorial defense in border regions. Soldiers in border provinces can be summoned within 6 hours, and in others within 12. That's what happens when your neighbor treats borders like suggestions. And what's Russia doing? Well, the usual, blaming everyone else. Kremlin outlets are already pushing the line that the drones over Poland were a Ukrainian provocation with helps from European elite. Another gem, that Ukraine supposedly hijacked Russian UAVs with electronic warfare and steered them into Poland. Yeah, Moscow actually claimed its drones are so advanced they only work properly when Ukraine doesn't touch them. Now, let's be clear, it's the same old propaganda trick. Commit the crime, then invent a story to blame the victim, but this is no sideshow. Drones hitting NATO territory means European security is on the line. And here, fairy tales about provocations won't cut it. Only tough sanctions, stronger air defense for allies, and coordinated pressure can't stop Moscow from testing how far it can go. Because if today Russia explains away drones over Poland, tomorrow it can just as easily announce NATO attacked us first. And that's why the civilized world have no choice but to answer not with words, but with actions. This year, the Baltic region turned into an aviation obstacle course. Almost 123,000 flights were affected by GPS interference. Sweden's SVT television station traced the source to Russian jamming and signal spoofing. Civilian airspace was treated like another testing ground for Moscow's electronic warfare. The peak came in April. 27.4% of flights in the region were disrupted, and in some areas, the chaos climbed past 42%. Pilots reported waves of fake signals pouring out of Kaliningrad, St. Petersburg, Smolensk, and Rostov. Commercial flights were forced to navigate through a battlefield of Russian transmitters. Aviation experts warned that GPS spoofing doesn't just disorient pilots, it endangers passengers, trigger delays, and bring airports to a standstill. In September, the problem spread to Bulgaria. Over Plovdiv, Ursula von der Leyen's plane lost navigation. The Financial Times says the crew had to pull out a paper map to continue the flight. A European leader relying on mid-20th century tools in 2025 thanks to Russia's interference. Now, Lavrov could not resist turning this incident into a performance. He said, quote, "We recently almost killed Ursula von der Leyen when she was flying to Bulgaria." A Russian foreign minister presenting a near disaster as a joke. He called it diplomacy. The world saw a minister ridiculing his own country.
Да, правда, это уже не то, чем Запад занимается. А вот недавно совсем Урсулу фон дер Ляйен чуть мы не угробили, которая летала тут на самолете или на вертолете по-разному.
This is another reminder of what the Kremlin's technology is really for. It is used to destabilize, not to defend. Interfering with civilian aircraft violates international law and puts lives at risk. And responsibility for that risk rests with Russia. Dmitry Medvedev, the Kremlin's apocalypse storyteller-in-chief, is back with another doomsday prophecy. Now, in his latest column, pompously titled "The New Finnish Doctrine: Stupidity, Lies, Ingratitude," he accuses Helsinki of preparing for war with Russia. Apparently, NATO membership looks to Medvedev like a declaration of Holy Crusade. According to him, Finland, having joined NATO, has supposedly turned into a giant springboard from which a campaign against Moscow is about to be launched. However, the only real springboard the Finns have so far is Lapland, where tourists from all over the world storm souvenir shops with Santa Claus paraphernalia. Medvedev warns that the alliance is active in all 5 spheres: on land, at sea, in the air, in space, and in cyberspace. It sounds as if NATO is already preparing to attack Russia, not only with tanks, but also with Santa from space. And cyberspace is a scary thing altogether. What if tomorrow someone hacks some Russian app and Dmitry Medvedev loses his favorite chat room? But he's not alone. Andriy Kartapolov, head of the State Duma's Defense Committee, declared that Finland is becoming a hotbed of fascism, and that its leaders' irresponsible policies could provoke conflict with Russia. Now, in Moscow's imagination, Finnish border guards are already marching on Red Square. Kartapolov even offered his sincere sympathy to the Finnish people, who he claims do not deserve the fate in the situation they now find themselves in. He blamed it all on the utterly incompetent policy of Finland's leadership, as if Helsinki simply opened a NATO welcome desk under Kremlin's window and is now responsible for Russia's nightmares. Kartapolov finished with the usual promise that Russia knows how to defend its interests and is prepared for any possible developments. Translation: if a bus of Finnish tourists crosses the border, Moscow might call it a national security threat.
Ничего нельзя исключать, потому что Финляндия проводит крайне безответственную политику, руководство Финляндии, прежде всего. И, по сути, она становится быстрее Украины настоящим рассадником фашизма. Мне очень жаль финский народ, который многое пережил и который не заслуживает той участи и того положения, в котором он сейчас находится. Я очень надеюсь, что рано или поздно финский народ это осознает, но если вот эта абсолютно бездарная политика нынешнего финского руководства приведет к каким-то трагическим последствиям, то это на их совести. Мы знаем, как защитить свои интересы, и мы готовы к любым вариантам развития.
So if Finns are calmly building their security, Russian officials are frantically scanning for horizon for imaginary armies. Instead of dealing with the real problem, Moscow keeps inventing disasters just across the border. And while Kartapolov warns the world about fascists in Lapland, the rest of the world just shakes its head in another episode of the Kremlin propaganda theater. Now, Russia staged its own European knockoff, proudly called Intervision. More than 20 countries were announced, banners waved, headlines printed, but when the cameras panned to the crowd, it turns out Moscow hadn't gathered nations, only costumes. Now, to fake international support, organizers paid locals to play dress-up. What was billed as a global show looked more like a school play with a bigger budget. Banned from Eurovision alongside Belarus, Moscow decided to resurrect its Soviet relic from the 70s and 80s. 23 countries were listed, from the United States and India, Brazil, Cuba, and Qatar. Russia's act was pro-Kremlin singer Shaman, while the Americans were represented by Brandon Howard, the man often marketed as a Michael Jackson's son. But here's a twist. None of those countries' citizens actually came to Moscow. Out of 800 people in the arena, barely a few dozen were real foreigners. The rest was damage control with a spotlight. Now, Russian sources admitted the foreign guests were just hired extras, promised around $70. Now, for that fee, they had to wave the right flag, wear the right costume, and cheer on cue. Phones were banned, cameras forbidden, and anyone caught filming faced a $6,000 fine. It was less of a festival than a closed set where reality itself had to be censored. In the end, Intervision wasn't really about music at all. It was a stage-managed fantasy where Russia could pretend isolation is strength. No real recognition, no real audience, just full control over the script, the crowd, and the camera angles. In the Kremlin's worldview, that counts as victory. For everyone else, just theater in uniform. And with that, we conclude this edition of Break the Fake. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.